was 2008, and the world was on a verge of collapse. The billionaire, who was Germany's fifth richest person by Forbes magazine, jumped in front of a speeding train on a cold, bitter Monday after his company, which made $40 billion in sales every year, was bleeding fortunes during the financial crisis. The billionaire, worth $9 billion, was remembered to have been broken by the sight of his business empire, and as his fortunes and life's work gradually slipped through his fingers. K.U. Pender was a distraught stock speculator in India who suffered steep losses in the Indian stock market during the fall, just before he chose to open the gas line in his house, light a match, and kill himself, his wife, and his 2-year-old son. A chief executive of an Arizona-based commercial lender wore a tuxedo, swallowed pills, and lay down to die in June as his company collapsed. During this period, the behemoth named Blackrock was called upon to save the day. Blackrock was practically operating as a shadow government. And today, BlackRock controls $8.6 trillion, almost a quarter of the $40 trillion in circulation in the world right now, and greater than the GDP of most countries. Assuming $40 trillion were evenly distributed among the world's population of 8 billion, BlackRock would at least have influence over 1.7 billion people. And yet, such a company is allowed to exist. But if you ask almost anyone else outside the financial sector, you'd be surprised at how oblivious they are of BlackRock. And most of all, the man behind the curtains, Larry Fink. BlackRock has been titled too big to fail, the Amazon in the finance industry. But in the end, is BlackRock too big to fail? What even happens if they do fail? To explore all of these, we would need to delve into the past of how Larry Fink made the behemoth called BlackRock. Larry Fink, brought up in a Jewish family, worked for his father in his shoe store, due to the fact that he wasn't as gifted as his brother in school. Faced with this reality, Larry knew he had to distinguish himself or forever live under the shadow of his brother. Forging ahead, Larry's search for power led him to study and earn a BA in political science in 1974. Upon getting his BA, Fink realized that power is where money is, and this led him to get an MBA in real estate from the same college in 1976. Immediately after he got his MBA, he got his first job at First Boston, a New York-based investment bank. He was placed in its bond trading department and, given his real estate knowledge, was mainly trading mortgage-backed bonds. And in just 2 years, Larry was running the department. As Larry grew in success, his ego grew twice as much, pushing him to become the youngest member of First Boston's management committee at just 31. Given enough time, coupled with Fink's tenacity, the CEO position was just a kiss away. At this point, Fink believed he had connected all the dots, but in an ever-changing environment, the dots moved just as fast. Ronald Reagan came into office with a mission to create a free market economy through a program called Reaganomics. Prior to the Reagan administration, the US economy experienced a decade of high unemployment and persistently high inflation. The Reagan administration implemented policies such as reducing tax, reducing government spending, tightening money supply in order to reduce inflation, and enforce the deregulation of Wall Street. The deregulation policies led to an environment in which greed and excessive risk-taking flourished without adequate oversight, ultimately leading to multiple frauds and convictions along with the failure of the nation's 7th largest bank. But it also improved the autonomy in Wall Street and helped new ideas to be explored. Due to this, competition in the financial sector was more fierce than ever. During this time, the multi-trillion-dollar market mortgage-backed securities became widely adopted, and this was majorly spearheaded by Larry Fink. This allowed Larry to add a staggering $1 billion to First Boston's bottom line. Adjusting for inflation, this was worth $2.47 billion. At this point, Larry had proven himself indispensable and needed to keep it that way. But the rise in competition meant repeated victories and profits were necessary to stay on top. And in 1986, Larry and his department concluded to take a risky bet on the interest rates going up, with the potential for huge profits. Unfortunately, the interest rates were lowered to stimulate economic growth, causing Larry and his department to lose a fortune worth $100 million. Adjusted for inflation, the loss is worth $247 million. And in 1988, despite all the profit Larry made for First Boston, he had no choice but to leave the firm, as his words and opinions no longer carried the weight it once did. His sought-after goal of becoming the MD was a dead shot. Major investment firms, hearing of this news, made sure to steer clear from Larry. Faced with this reality, Larry had to fix his own mistake, carve his own path, and make his own profits. And later that year, He started Blackrock. It's almost taboo to talk about Blackrock without speaking of Aladdin. In 1988, Larry Fink and 7 associates, some from First Boston, started Blackrock with a $5 million loan. Larry Fink, after making a mockery of himself in First Boston, felt an immense pressure to redeem himself, and this made him incredibly obsessed with fixing his own mistake. This obsessiveness became the foundation of the titan Blackrock, leading him to implement a solution called Aladdin. Aladdin holds the keys to a treasure trove of financial data. It's a system that can help managers track investments, assess risk, and make lightning-fast trades, and most importantly, at low fees, all done through a single powerful interface. It could track millions of daily deals and analyze each asset in BlackRock's client stock holdings to understand how they might be influenced by even slight economic developments. This helped the biggest players maintain their fortunes. At this point, Aladdin became more than just a software. It was now an ecosystem, a way of life for the world's most elite players. Aladdin became the ultimate tool and brainbox for BlackRock, helping them gain an edge in the cutthroat world of finance. And for those who couldn't replicate such technology, with a merciful fee, they were forced to conform to BlackRock and use Aladdin or risk going belly up. In 1994, the Fed increased interest rates over fears of inflation, causing massive sell-offs of bonds, which as a result, bond prices began to plummet and became highly unattractive to investors. This decision resulted in a loss of $1.5 trillion from across the globe. This period was termed the Great Bond Massacre. In this volatile environment, the risk analytics built as Aladdin revealed its value. BlackRock's funds held up well and had minimal loss compared to the overall market. Aladdin enabled BlackRock's investment teams to understand what they had bought. The market took note, and people started to call BlackRock asking them to take a look at their portfolio. By the end of 1994, BlackRock had $53 billion in asset under management. Yet, Fink's ambition wasn't satiated. He was looking for world domination. But Fink wasn't delusional at all. He knew the business all too well. He knew that in order to fully survive and attain domination in the finance industry, it was more about rendering different services to investors. You cover all the bases and you will be at the top of some list in terms of performance or lowest in fees. If you provide only one investment strategy, you have a limited shelf life. The market will end up burning you at some point. And because of this, BlackRock began offering a variety of services to investors, such as asset management, investment advisory, financial planning, risk management, regulatory advisory, and much more. And by the end of 2006, BlackRock had more than $1 trillion of assets under management. At this point, it was no longer about redeeming himself or his loss of 20 years ago. It was about being important. It was about staying relevant. It was about being first in line. His tremendous ability to network and solidified reputation would take him to further heights in the incoming crisis. The years preceding 2008 had been quite promising, and the US economy was booming and expanding rapidly. But also, a housing bubble had been formed in the real estate market as a result of the widespread adoption of mortgage-backed securities in the 1980s, which created a situation where properties were overvalued, and as a result, home buyers were given subprime mortgages. Basically, loans which they couldn't afford. These subprime mortgages were then packaged into complex financial instruments called mortgage-backed securities and sold to investors. And when the home buyers were unable to pay back their loans, the value of the mortgage-backed securities plummeted, and many investors suffered significant losses. This was majorly caused by human greed. Greed by the managers of financial institutions led to easy loans with little to no down payments. Greed by homeowners led to purchases of houses they couldn't afford. Greed on Wall Street led to the creation of clever new financial instruments like mortgage-backed securities. But while everyone was trying to pick up their corpses, BlackRock was too busy feeding off of them. During the recession, the Fed, Wall Street rivals, foreign central banks all came to BlackRock for advice on how to survive the economical crisis. Fed used Aladdin to evaluate which banks were worth saving and which weren't. Banks called BlackRock to evaluate their portfolios and help prevent further losses. Companies like Lehman Brothers, AIG, General Motors, Washington Mutual, and so forth filed for bankruptcy, and in order to survive, needed to be acquired or be bailed out by the government. The US Treasury turned to BlackRock to help advise and manage the financing of the bailouts, including the $180 billion bailout of AIG. Lehman Brothers, which also filed for bankruptcy and was hoping for a bailout, was left to feed on its own carcass. This boosted Aladdin's portfolio of clients to a total of $7 trillion of asset under management in 2008. Aladdin kept on growing and adding more institutional clients, and became the point of call during financial crises. The demise of Lehman Brothers affected Barclays Global Investor, which acquired some of its units. By early 2009, Barclays was scrambling to raise money and avoid a UK government bailout. Bailouts gives governments total control and oversight over a company, and are likely to implement stricter regulations on the company. BGI was desperate and despised the thought of a bailout. BlackRock came to aid and acquired the company for $13.5 billion. BGI owned iShares, which was the biggest name in the ETF industry. This allowed BlackRock to step into the trillion-dollar exchange-traded funds industry, and in 2023, iShares is now managing more than $3 trillion. Aladdin is now used by Apple, Microsoft, and Alphabet for their corporate treasury investment portfolios. Over the years, Aladdin has built an enormous client base and has become the world's default option of the marketplace. This has led BlackRock to have hands in every corner of the world, and while the funds used to accumulate shares of companies belonging to their clients, BlackRock reserves the right to vote on their behalf. This has given BlackRock the title, the world's largest asset manager, and Larry Fink, the $10 trillion man. At this point, BlackRock could not be ignored. Larry Fink could not be overlooked. World domination has been achieved.